Hello, I'm Nathan Leahy, and welcome to Next Week in Gaming. One of our first releases is a game called Grimsby, and this is solo developed by a chap called Adam Wells. It's coming out soon with no specific release date, and it just looks kind of strange, really. The game is set across these little separate dioramas, all very overly exaggerated, set in the north of England, hence the Grimsby being related to Grimsby and Leeds and stuff like that. And it's sort of odd. It's a point and click adventure where you just you have these tiny little maps, and the game is sort of focusing on the fact that Grimsby is not the most interesting of places, and you just sort of go into these little sections of game and talk to people. And obviously it's got some very extreme stereotypical British language in there, so you can expect all of that absolute ridiculousness. And it's just a weird looking title, but you know, the animations look pretty swish and it could be highly amusing. The write-up, I'm not sure how much of it to take seriously and which of it is just sort of little witty quips, which the game is no doubt filled with. It just looks like a weird little title, and I don't know, it sort of tickles me a little bit in the way that it just looks quite interesting and weird at the same time. So I'm probably going to have a quick look at that when it does release and just sort of see where the game's going. I mean, it could turn into a cult classic, but you know, I can't tell here or there whether or not this one's going to be a good game or just utterly bizarre. Releasing on Thursday the 12th of May is a game called Goliath by Whalebox Studios, and this is quite a unique approach to the sort of hack and slash title, in that it's set in this sort of bizarre world that's got a mixture of all these different eras, from pirates to 1930s to future. And one of the most cool ideas about this game is that it has this, it's a procedurally generated map, it's got dynamic weather and sort of like a day and night cycle, and the whole purpose of this game is you sort of craft these new Goliath suits, very similar looking to Blitzcrank. One of the reasons why I looked at it in the first place. And you sort of start off crafting sort of low-level wooden suits, then you get onto stone, then you get onto metal, and then you get onto these futuristic suits. And you have to sort of use them to fight these enormous, crazy enemies and all these other Goliaths knocking around. And what's really cool is that these suits their sort of performance and their effectiveness is directly affected by this weather and this day and night cycle, so you can sort of switch them out based on their abilities and how they perform in those environments, I guess, which is actually you know, pretty interesting. So I'm looking forward to seeing this one next week. Also releasing on Thursday the 12th of May is a game by Fraula, and this is called Neon Drive, and it's a little bit of a throwback to that sort of Kung Fury Blood Dragon sort of art style. And the gameplay initially looks quite similar to Audio Surf, and what's quite interesting about this title is that every single level has its own custom-made soundtrack. Now, the gameplay may look a lot like Audio Surf initially, but as I began to watch more and more of it, it sort of transfers into this top-down view with a similar sort of knocking about between these different tracks, and then it transfers into sort of this Transformer vibe where you turn into an aeroplane and it sort of makes the map cylindrical. The soundtrack sound fantastic. The levels, you know, it's a mobile port, worth mentioning. So the levels, there's not that many of them, but the levels just look fantastic. I mean, if you see the gameplay footage that's probably playing over it right now, it just it looks amazing. I'm quite a big fan of those sort of 80s art styles, but it just looks like a genuinely interesting looking title, and it's probably well worth it purely for that soundtrack. Releasing on Friday the 13th of May is Doom, which is one of the big AAA releases next week, and this is of course by Bethesda Softworks and ID Software. Now, this did have like a multiplayer beta which did not do particularly well, and there was sort of quite a bit of vitriol towards the options menu, and so they did this insane thing and went, okay, we'll just throw all the menus at everyone, just give them all the menus, which, you know, is not necessarily a bad thing, but you know, menus don't improve gameplay all that much. So the multiplayer aspect probably is still not so great. However, a lot of people remember and play Doom for all that single player content, so hopefully this is going to stay true to the form. Obviously, we remember Doom 3, it had all of those heavily scripted events, which, yeah, were kind of cheaty, but at the same time it felt like that was what made Doom. So we're sort of expecting, yes, you're going to be a walking armory, yes, you do kind of look like a character from Halo, and you're going to be doing a lot of strafing and shooting, and it just needs to be mad fun, and as long as they get that right, then I can't possibly see this doing particularly badly. I think people need to go into Doom thinking, you know, all the other Dooms were not particularly serious, it was just going around shooting demons and crazy monsters and getting scared occasionally. So I have I'm middling on this game. I think it will probably be reasonably good if people don't expect too much in the way of like storyline and complex mechanics. But, you know, solid, entertaining shooters are sort of... There's not really that many of them these days, and I just hope Doom 3, well, this is now Doom 4, Doom 6, whatever it is these days. I just hope that it can sort of live up to the name that it really has to at this stage. Finally, our review title for Thursday the 12th of May will be Paradox Interactive's Stellaris, which is a game I've been absolutely stoked for ages, mainly because I was a huge Master of Orion player back when I was a teenager, and I lost weeks and weeks and weeks of my summer break holidays just to playing these massively long skirmishes which would take days to complete, and this sort of looks like it's promising to go in that direction, which for me is awesome. I've already jumped into it and not got particularly far just because the game is huge and the skirmish is going to last forever, but I desperately wanted to see those Blorg, and a lot of the gameplay is very similar to aspects of like Endless Legend and Civilization, but it's set in this map that when you sort of zoom up it gets bigger, so you've got your solar systems, you've got your galaxies, and it's just huge, absolutely massive, and a lot of it is down to not necessarily just all-out war, of course you can go that route, but a lot of diplomacy as well, and it's like... I played a few hours of it earlier this week, and it does genuinely feel like quite a unique 4X title. It has got some very similar mechanics to a lot of other games, sort of making the basis, but for the most part it does look pretty cool, and it's got a lot of unique content in there as well. And not to mention the fact that they've made it near infinitely moddable, to be honest. So yeah, look out for our review of that next week. So that's it from us in Next Power Up. Join us next week on Thursday for our weekly review, and of course next week on Saturday for our next Week in Gaming episode. As usual, leave your comments in the section below for what you guys have been playing. Last night was another Friday Night Magic for me, and unfortunately I have not been able to break the curse of the 2 for 2. Although I did play a new deck based around Madness, which did very well in testing, but again, just sort of did average and middling. It is worth noting there is another up to 90% off Devolver Digital sale on Steam among the humble store sale, and we can probably expect a ton more sales to come too. I'm guessing Steam sales coming up soon as well. So yeah, I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode, and we see you next week.